world that nature has to offer in one lifetime. What a dream! To travel freely into the home of the wild ones, to live with them, to become so accepted by them that they hardly notice that you're there. That is not only my dream, that's my goal. I'm wildlife photographer Bill Porter, and I'll take you there.
I walked on the mountain and down by the sea. There I saw men who shared this world with me. We shared this world with wild ones, that's the way it's meant to be. We're also meant to save them, that's the power in you and me. I wandered down the valley, crossed to the other shore. There's wildlife all around us, birds and bees and so much more. We're always going to take some, that's the way it's meant to be. We're also meant to save them, that's the power in you and me. Well, I woke up to the sunrise, stood there at sunset too. Still I saw the wild ones, wish you had been there too. For with one touch of nature, the whole world had become kin. This message all around us, that's the way it's always been.
Wildlife Unlimited Foundation, thanking you for doing your part to keep our wildlife unlimited. I'm wildlife photographer Bill Porter, and I'll take you there. Sometimes they're cute. Sometimes they're beautiful. Other times they're simply amazing. But it's always exciting in the wonderful world of the wild ones. Wetlands and their inhabitants are biological indicators of the quality of our environment. Wetlands are not only habitat for animals, but large reservoirs for storage and filtering of precious water supplies. Recharging of our groundwater supply is one aspect, but many fur bearers, as well as birds, rely on these areas to live. To observe wildlife as you travel through or around these areas is indeed a pleasure to behold. But if we take one creature and single it out, observe its behavior patterns, what it needs to survive, how much room it needs. Indeed, every living thing needs its own space. A good example of this is the sandhill crane. Work being done on the sandhill will likely save other cranes from extinction.
On land and underwater, sportsman and photographer Bill Porter with son John and family invite you all to join them at a spot in the country where we hope to see some wildlife still run free. We'll go hunting, climbing, fishing, diving, see things that help to set the spirit free. We might take some of the surplus that the good Lord has provided, always mindful of the sportsman's creed. So the wildlife we all love remains unlimited. Oh, Bill and Rose and little John, who's grown to be a man, will show you through a camera's eye wonders of the land. You might camp with them by mountain streams or run barefoot in the sand. But wherever you go, recall the creed, keep the wildlife unlimited.
The Wildlife Unlimited Foundation presents the Greater Sandhill Crane. Join me, photographer Bill Porter, on land, underwater, and in the air, and John Porter, field assistant. And with Dr. Ray Anderson, wildlife professor and research consultant, University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. And Dr. Rob Horwich, resident ethologist, International Crane Foundation, Baraboo, Wisconsin. The Greater Sandhill Crane is truly one of the wonders of the wildlife. Having passed through the years from the Ice Age to the present, with very few evolutionary changes taking place. Moreover, this large bird takes to the air with the greatest of ease and flies long hours each day while in migration. Today, more people are observing and enjoying nature, But we must do more. Research is a vital part of human existence. All the information we learn about this complex world enhances our lives. I talked to Dr. Ray Anderson of the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point about some sand hills I had seen with colored leg bands on their legs. And I asked him about research that had been done and how well the sand hills had fared in Wisconsin.
Of course, at one time, as with most wildlife species, there were great numbers of sandhill cranes in the state of Wisconsin. But in this period was about early 1800s. 1850 on to the early 1900s, numbers started to dwindle with settlement of the Wisconsin situation. Cranes that previously were found in the prairie areas, which were now converted to agriculture, started disappearing. And of course, late 1800s was the time when we had heavy market hunting of cranes throughout much of the Great Lakes area. So the cranes disappeared at that point, down to very, very low numbers. As a matter of fact, in the early 1900s, if we had had an endangered species program at that time, I'm sure the crane would be listed as an endangered species.
Leopold had done a very preliminary wildlife survey at that time. He listed the crane as being very few in number, along with other species that were in trouble at that time. We didn't know exactly where they were or the distribution of them, except for the preliminary studies Hammerstrom's had done in the late 30s. Several studies were done out of the University of Stevens Point, which determined the distribution of the cranes and the numbers which are now increasing since the 1930s. The migration route and the wintering grounds of the sandhill crane was also charted, done largely by tagging the birds with leg bands and then noting the reports of these birds showing up wherever, whether they had been seen or even killed, gave a good indication of the routes that they had followed. Radio tags were also used on the sandhill crane. This enabled researchers to follow them on their migration route from Wisconsin to Jasper, Pulaski, Indiana, their major staging area, and from there through Tennessee and Kentucky and into their wintering grounds where they had scattered over a wide area of Florida. There were other factors that entered into bringing the cranes on in great numbers. One was the cranberry culture, which created wetlands that were not present before. Also, there are two very large federal wildlife areas in the state of Wisconsin, one at Necedah and the other at Horicon. They both provide habitat for the sandhill crane. We now enjoy looking at many thousands of cranes, many of them nesting as well. As a matter of fact, several states now allow hunting of the sandhill crane. Cranes do, however, cause crop damage in the Canadian area and the wheat-growing areas of the United States by eating the wheat crops. They also like to pull the young corn out of the ground very early in the spring. This causes considerable damage to that agricultural pursuit. This is due to the large numbers that are present. One must remember that we put the title of nuisance animal on the cranes. They are there doing exactly what they should do, but it conflicts with us, so we call it a nuisance animal. Their wintering grounds and migration route is just as important as their nesting areas. Knowing where they stopped on migration, the habitat they used at that time, as well as their winter habitat, is important to the total picture of the sandhill crane. If any one of these aspects were to disappear due to whatever factor, the population of the crane would be in trouble, just as seriously as if the nesting habitat disappeared. Although most sandhill cranes nest near water or shallow water situations, some of them do nest on the upland areas. Not many of them, but they do. And this may be due to the expanding population of the sandhill crane. Research of wildlife is largely done through observation, usually starting with the behavioral patterns to do with the reproduction activities. Courtship dances always precede nest building. It has been established that sandhills pair at 3 years of age, but some new research now indicates that reproduction may not occur until 6 years have passed. Although sandhills lay 2 eggs each year in the wild, they seldom raise more than one of the young to fledging stage. They can leave the nest as soon as they're hatched and seek cover even at this young age. Fast, and prior to the post-juvenile molt, the crown of the young is covered with downy feathers. These feathers are lost during and after the post-juvenile molt. The skin on the ground becomes pinkish, then a little more red, and more red as the bird matures. The red crown expansion, a threat display, used in many stressful situations, and is part of all threat displays. It is important for us to realize that animals are reacting to stimulus. Notice here we have a female stimulated in 2 different ways. First, she wants to lure me away from the young, distraction. Second is aggression, as she wants to chase me off. Often at this time, displays are often distorted. This upright walk is also close to the adornment walk, but differs with the ruffled feathers on the back of the neck. The walk itself is not as rigid as it would be in a true adornment walk. This is caused by 2 different stimulants reacting at the same time. She wants to be aggressive, yet she wants to lure me away. During the foraging display, a crane may pick at or drop vegetation and jab vigorously at the vegetation with its bill. Note at the end of each display, the sandhill returns to an upright position. The body wing shaking is also incorporated into a number of preening displays. True preening is when the crane actually nibbles and pulls at the feathers, thus cleaning or straightening the feathers. The crouch display is not a submissive display, but rather another threat display. Clearly dominant, the red wing display, whether towards another crane or as seen here, recorded in the wild on video for the first time, against a young red fox, this crane kept the young fox in a short hole for at least 5 minutes before backing off. Unison calling is essential to pair bond information. Guard call is very similar to the unison call when repeated in a series, but is done by one bird and is often the alert to flee. You can also hear the difference of the male and the female guard call, the male being low on the end notes and the female being higher. Cranes seem to always be alert, but sometimes assume an alert position if certain danger is present. This is by no means all of the different displays, but I hope it gives you a better idea of what to look for when you see wildlife and a better understanding of animal behavior.
The Sandhill Crane is doing very well in the state of Wisconsin at the moment. There are other species of cranes in the United States and in the world, and other subspecies of sandhills in North America that are not doing as well. There's a race of sandhill cranes known as the Mississippi sandhill crane and the Florida sandhill crane and the Cuban sandhill crane.
And of course the whooping crane, the symbol of endangered species here in North America, as well as other cranes elsewhere in the world, are in serious trouble.
We are constantly looking for methods of preserving these species of cranes and, where possible, to reintroduce them into areas where they used to be at one time. We're currently involved with a research project that is looking at a new method of introducing cranes into new areas of the world where they can exist and do so in a fashion that will allow them to be productive. We are doing this with sandhill cranes at the moment, and it involves the behavior of the bird. This research project involving the imprinting of sandhill cranes is a cooperative effort between the International Crane Foundation and the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point.
I caught up with Rob Horwitz, resident ethologist with the International Crane Foundation, Baraboo, Wisconsin, at the Necedah Wildlife Refuge. I had heard about his attempt to raise cranes, isolated from humans, and about the crane costume he used. I wanted to know more about his project.
Through this research project, I'm attempting to develop a technique to rear sandhill cranes or any other precocial birds for eventual release and survival in the wild. By precocial birds, I mean birds that are hatched at an advanced age. They're fully feathered, and they can take care of themselves somewhat. Examples of this would be chickens and turkeys, cranes, ostriches, rheas. I'm using the sandhill cranes because they're a common species. And they're not endangered, but we eventually would like to use this technique on endangered species. The family of cranes has 15 species in it, 7 of which are endangered. I've devised a setup for hand-rearing chicks that includes a mounted crane body and a puppet like this, which has a movable bill, and we imprint the chicks on the model and puppet using the female sound. I'll just play you a little bit. That's the nesting call, and it seems to be innately attractive to the newly hatched chick. We use the puppet both to feed, it's got a movable bill, and we use it to both feed the chick and later to show the chick food and point it out. Imprinting in precocial chicks refers to their rapid attachment to and the following of the mother by the chick immediately after hatching. In captivity, the hand-rearing of birds may present some problems. The chicks may imprint on their human caretaker and later identify with humans more strongly than with their own species. This may prevent their natural breeding from actually occurring. So our experimental studies are trying to solve a number of problems. The first is to prevent the chicks from imprinting on humans, and if possible, we'd like to have them actually fear humans. Secondly, we want to aid their physical survival in the wild by teaching them and by allowing them to learn to feed on natural foods in the natural areas. And of course, we have to protect them from predators during the most vulnerable period until they can fly. Thirdly, we want to facilitate their eventual association with wild cranes for following them in the migration south and for eventual breeding with their own species. The reason hand-rearing is important is that it doesn't have to depend on the difficulty and expense of maintaining numbers of breeding pairs of cranes. And secondly, through artificial techniques, you can get female cranes to produce greater numbers of eggs and young. In the wild, cranes will lay only 2 eggs and usually only rear 1 chick. In captivity, by removing a female's eggs, she will lay many more, which can then be artificially incubated, and the chicks can be hand-reared. Additionally, hand-reared chicks have a better rate of survival. Thus, our hand-rearing experiments are an alternative to other types of experiments being carried on now with whooping cranes. In some of these, the whooping crane eggs are substituted into the nests of wild sandhill cranes, who incubate the eggs and care for the chicks. Although a number of chicks have been reared in this manner, it's still not certain whether these chicks will associate and mate with other whooping cranes rather than the sandhill cranes which reared them. Thus, it may be that techniques such as the one that I've developed will help the chicks to identify and breed with their own species.
When the birds left the staging area at Reseda, some of them dispersed quite far. It was very difficult to find them, of course, with a vehicle and a radio antenna on a vehicle. And consequently, we used an airplane with antennas on them and flew many hours over many, many square miles to find out where they were, and did locate them. And did bring them back, one of them back to the area to reintroduce them to the other birds.
I know some of the birds are already in Pulaski, Indiana, and are going to be followed to Florida and their winter range determined there.
We'll be following these birds when they come back to Wisconsin. We should be able to follow them for a couple of years, mainly because the transmitter is solar powered. And as long as the sun shines, it recharges the battery and it sends out a signal. So we'll be able to follow them for quite some time.
I understand, John, one of your students from the university is in Pulaski, Indiana now, where the cranes went to. And after they stay there for a few weeks, John will follow them to Florida and determine exactly where in Florida they winter.
We'll also follow them back into Wisconsin next spring and then see what they're doing and where they're going once they get here. He's doing this as a part of his educational program here, where he's in quest of a wildlife degree at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. We learned a lot from last year's work with the cranes on this reintroduction program, and we're going to modify that, which we did in some instances, and repeat it next year with larger numbers of birds to see if it cannot become more effective and based on that which we learned already.
During a snowstorm in November of '78, a family of radio-tagged Greater Sandhill Cranes left Crex Meadows, Wisconsin. This was the beginning of a truly remarkable encounter by a team of researchers. They wanted to learn the migration route. Using ground and air radio equipment, they followed the family to Montella, Wisconsin. Then C2 and C3, as they were now called. You see, the father was C1, the mother was C2, and a radio-tagged young was C3. CU was a second young that was marked but not radio-tagged. Well, C2 and C3 went straight south, and they were lost from radio contact. But C1 went to Pulaski, Indiana, the normal rest stop for the Greater Sandhill Cranes. C2 and C3 never stopped at Pulaski, Indiana, but they went to Florida. They were located there at their winter site. C1 also went to Florida, but not to the same site.
On land and underwater, sportsman and photographer Bill Porter with son John and family invite you all to join them at a spot in the country where we hope to see some wildlife still run free. We'll go hunting, climbing, fishing, diving, see things that help to set the spirit free. We might take some of the surplus that the good Lord has provided, always mindful of the sportsman's creed. So the wildlife we all love remains unlimited. Oh, Bill and Rose and little John, who's grown to be a man, will show you through a camera's eye wonders of the land. You might camp with them by mountain streams or run barefoot in the sand. But wherever you go, recall the creed, keep the wildlife unlimited. For a sportsman's more than just a hunter or a fisherman. There's things to see to all the mind of many a mortal man. From the way the wild protect their young to canyons carved in sand. Oh, don't take them all as you recall. We're for wildlife unlimited. Yes, Bill and Rose and little John, who's grown to be a man, will show you through a camera's eye wonders of the land. You might camp with them by mountain streams or run barefoot in the sand. But wherever you go, recall the creed, keep the wildlife unlimited. Wherever you go, recall that creed, keep the wildlife unlimited.